I started out as a prosecutor when I was a baby. I was 23 years old. And for 21 years, I fought for justice for victims on every single case I ever handled, always trying to do the right thing. And then for the last case of my career at the DA's office, to be accused of what I was accused of and to have to see a family that didn't deserve to have any of this happen to them have to put up with it too, it was pretty awful. On January the 11th, 1999, the murder of Belinda Temple, who was 8 months pregnant with a little baby girl, shocked everyone in Katy, Texas, and changed a lot of people's lives. Prosecuting this case was one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my whole career. This trial made my life a living hell for a long time because I was accused of withholding evidence and sending an innocent man to prison. I couldn't believe it. Up until that time, no one said ugly things about me as a prosecutor. I was the golden girl. But on this case, I was not only fighting for justice for Belinda and her baby, I also had to fight for my own career and my own reputation. I felt sorry for myself. I got mad. I lost friends. But I tried to always tell myself just to shut up and grow up and suck it up, because the real concern here is what all this did to Belinda's family. They didn't just have to go through losing her and the baby and waiting for the charges to get filed and waiting for the trial to happen because of all the mess. They had to do it all again. And it was just really, really sad. So I think it's time for people to hear the truth of exactly what happened to Belinda's family and to me, to finally get that justice for Belinda and her baby. It's time to let the souls of Belinda and Aaron in heaven rest in peace.
Harris County 911 Police Fire Ambulance.
Yes, somebody's broken into my house and my wife has been shot.
Stay on the line for the ambulance, sir.
Her brain is on the floor. I think she's already dead. She's 8 months pregnant.
Around 5:30 in the evening, Sarge come in and told us they had a homicide at a location in Katy.
When we first arrived at the scene, David Temple was sitting on a bench in the backyard, and his dog was loose.
Temple's had a chow that was not real friendly.
You couldn't get anywhere near the house. He wasn't going to let you in.
After Mr. Temple secured the dog, we detained him in a marked unit.
According to the homeowner, David Temple, his wife is upstairs in her master closet, dead, with her brains blown out.
Constable's office already had secured the scene, and a couple of us did enter the residence.
It looks like there was forced entry to the back door.
First, we went up the stairs to the master bedroom. To the left of the main bathroom was a large walk-in closet, which is where we saw Belinda's body. Feet closest to the door and her head toward the wall. There was a significant amount of brain matter there on the wall and between the clothing. This was vicious. This was brutal.
It's clear, it was a shotgun blast because there's pellets on the ground, there's shotgun wadding and brain matter all over the wall. We did find 2 guns in the closet, both of them rifles. They were behind some clothing in the corner, but no shotguns.
As we went through the first floor, we saw that there was a television lying by the table and it's still plugged in.
We also see the drawers were open, but everything was neat and tidy in the drawers.
If this is in fact a burglary, it was botched because a burglar is going to take whatever they can find to carry out of a house.
Right away, investigators are noticing things that the average person doesn't notice and appreciating that things just aren't quite adding up.
One thing about the forced entry to the back door is if the door was in a closed position and someone from outside forced entry, may break in the glass to get in to turn the knob, you would expect to see the glass going in that direction. The glass was not where it should be. In this case, all the glass is shattered to the left in front of the fireplace.
Therefore, the door had to have been open when the glass was broken.
We needed to get a statement from David. He's supposedly the last to see her alive, first to see her dead. Was there somebody in between there? We don't know. So I took him to the station.
In any investigation, the detectives want to try and get statements from all the witnesses they can as soon as possible, because that way everything that just happened is very fresh in their mind.
While I was talking to David, he certainly did not appear to be grieving. He had no tears in his eyes weren't bubbling up. He was cordial in talking with me back and forth. He went through the story. He teaches at one school, his wife teaches at another. His son was at a daycare, and he was sick. His wife had to go pick him up. David said she dropped by his family's house, and while there, she picked up some soup and brought it home. When she got home, she said she was tired. So David decided to take the child out to a park and then go shopping. I had asked him what park he went to. There's two different parks, and he was mixed up on what park he had taken him to. And then he said after they played at the park for just a short time, he went to Brookshire Brothers to go shopping. And then he went to Home Depot. After he left Home Depot, he went home. And as he's coming out of the garage, he notices the window is shattered on the back door. So he immediately picks Evan up, his son, and takes him across the street to his neighbor's house and tells him there's something going on at the house. Watch the child.
911, go ahead, ma'am.
Yes, somebody has broken into my neighbor's house, and he wanted me to call you.
Where's your neighbor at right now?
Him and my husband went back to the house.
Between the different things in the house not seeming to add up to a burglary and the holes in David Temple's story that just don't make sense, it's just natural that the detectives would need to ask him more questions.
Now we go back in and talk to him, and we're saying, this doesn't look right. This doesn't look right. This is where he starts getting agitated. And I said, the only thing to really clarify this would be if you'd agree to take a polygraph, and that's where he stopped. I ain't doing that. I don't have anything else to say. I want an attorney.
I think a polygraph is a tool to show you how cooperative someone really is. So if your wife and your unborn daughter have been brutally murdered, and you want to cooperate and you want to find out who did it, why wouldn't you take a polygraph? Why wouldn't you hurry up and take a polygraph so they can check that box and move on to find the real killer?
And of course, I called the DA, and the DA said, yeah, we just don't have enough. Just because he doesn't want to take a polygraph's not probable cause to arrest him. So we have to let him go.
When David Temple walked out of the station that night, the detectives didn't know if an innocent man was walking out or a cold-blooded killer.
She did not kick off her shoes. She didn't go up to bed and take off her glasses. She was killed before either of those two things happened.
David Temple's family brings up a name of a brand new suspect.
What's he doing up north that he's not telling us about?
Was he up there to possibly dispose of a shotgun?
What are they trying to hide? And maybe there is way more to this relationship than he's ever told anybody, which, kind of gives you a motive.
I fell through the ground. I didn't make a sound.
January the 11th of 1999 was the worst day of my life. I get a phone call from Belinda's father-in-law, Ken Temple. Kenny said, Belinda's been murdered. To get the news over the phone that your twin sister's been murdered, that was the worst news I could have ever gotten. Her world revolved around her son, Evan, and she was so excited about having a little girl, Erin. Such a senseless tragedy. I never thought something like this would happen to Belinda.
By the next day, Belinda Temple's murder was the lead story because it was so unbelievable.
This morning, the students and faculty at Katy High School are shocked and saddened by the death of teacher Belinda Temple, who was found shot in her home last night.
There was a lot of news coverage with the students talking about how much they loved her. Even if they weren't in her class, they would go by, "Hey, Miss Lucas, how are you?" She would go into the gym and shoot basketball with them. She impacted everybody that she met.
This case got a lot of press because Belinda was everybody's sweetheart. And David Temple had been the biggest star of the football team at Katy High School. Everybody in town knew who he was. And so when they met each other at Stephen F. Austin, fell in love and got married, everybody liked them and loved that story.
Belinda and I were born in Martins Ferry, Ohio, on December 30th of 68, and we moved to Nacogdoches, Texas in 1976. When we were born, I was 2 pounds heavier and 2 inches longer than Belinda, but it didn't take her long to catch up, and she ended up being like 3 inches taller than me. So Belinda called me Shrimpy. We did everything together. We shared a bedroom, we shared birthdays. We liked playing softball growing up. Belinda would play first base and I played second base, and we made a lot of double plays. We were very competitive. Belinda wanted to be a teacher, and especially go into special education. She wanted to reach out and help as many people as she could that had some kind of disability.
Belinda and I met at college. Belinda and I spent an incredible amount of time together. We were roommates, and we also worked together, and then we went out together. When she first met David, I thought he was a pompous ass. He made fun of my accent and my kicking boots, so it wasn't the best first impression, but she was very happy, so, you just roll with it.
When I first met David, I knew he was a big football star. He was very popular. Had the nickname Temple of Doom.
David and Belinda both wanted to teach and coach, both athletic, both family-oriented. They both had the same goals. She loved him, and she was ready to be a wife.
Belinda seemed so happy.
The day after the murder, we witnessed the autopsy. The evidence is collected that is still with the body, like pellets from the shotgun. According to the medical examiner, it was a close contact wound with a 12-gauge shotgun to the back of Belinda's head. And yes, of course, seeing the baby removed from the womb. It's, hey, you're homicide, you're supposed to be tough, and you're supposed to Now, if you got kids and this doesn't burn into your memory, something's wrong with you. Sorry. That'll never go away.
When we first get on an investigation, we divide up the duties. I went to Katy High School and started talking to Belinda's coworkers. I learned that they loved her, they loved working with her, she had the perfect family, she had the perfect marriage.
As the detectives from the Sheriff's Department started to look deeper into Belinda Temple's life, her friends, her job, her marriage, what they thought the story was started to change.
Tammy Harlan had been friends with Belinda, and she was one of the first people that I talked to tell me about the troubles between David and Belinda Temple. Tammy didn't like the way that David talked to Belinda. He said she was fat, and he did not talk well about her family. He called them a bunch of rednecks. He thought that his family was better than her family.
Belinda did say, he's kind of distant, and we've had some troubles. She said that they just stopped speaking to each other at home. And it was a couple of months that they did this. It was just weird to me. How do you not talk to someone you share a house with?
Belinda would confide to Tammy that she thought David might be cheating on her. Charges she saw on the credit card, times that he wasn't home.
A friend of the Temples said that David may have been seeing another girl. Her name was Heather.
She was a co-worker of David's, and there was a rumor that they had been talking in more than a friendly way.
Investigators need to track down Heather Scott to get a statement from her. If it turns out to be true that Heather Scott and David Temple are having an affair, that's going to cause more questions that need to be asked of David Temple. But at this point, David stopped cooperating with the Sheriff's Department. The next step is to look into his alibi by looking at that CCTV footage from Brookshire Brothers and at the Home Depot where he claimed he went that day. What doesn't make sense to the investigators is that David Temple chose a store 6 miles from his house when there's a grocery store much closer than that. Then they discover an important discrepancy. If he left Brookshire Brothers at 4:38 p.m. and got to the Home Depot at 5:14 p.m., that's a window of 36 minutes. But those two places are only about 10 minutes apart. So what was he doing for the rest of that time?
Belinda and Aaron were laid to rest at the First Baptist Church in Katy, Texas.
Several hundred people came to her funeral. A lot of students, I believe they had actually closed the school down early so they could attend the funeral.
Belinda's parents were there, and of course they're just devastated. They loved Belinda. They loved her. But David wasn't really crying. He wasn't really, he just sat there. I've never had a murdered spouse, so I don't know how you're supposed to act, but it's kind of weird.
While the investigation is still in the early stages, David Temple's family brings to the Sheriff's Department's attention the possibility of another suspect.
Riley Joe Sanders was the next door neighbor. He was going to the same school that Belinda taught at. And there was some initial information that there was hard feeling between him and Belinda. We needed to get some more information.
Although David Temple's alibi still needs to be looked into a little further, another person of interest in the murder of Belinda Temple is identified.
The Temple family brought up the possibility of the neighbor boy, Riley Joe Sanders.
Riley Joe went to Katy High School and knew Belinda Temple well. She had actually helped him with some of his classes.
A couple months prior to the murder of Belinda Temple, Riley Joe's parents were gone. He had a party, and there was some broken glass into Temple's yard. Belinda told his parents, "Your son had this party," and they grounded him. And so David Temple's family said, "You need to look at Riley Joe. He's got an axe to grind with Belinda."
I went to Katy High School, and I found out that the day that Belinda was murdered, Riley Joe was gone for part of the day. We needed to talk to him and anyone he was with and find out what was going on.
Apparently, Riley Joe had skipped his last class, and when confronted with that information, he said he was just at the house smoking dope with his friends. We talked to him at length about his relation with Belinda, and he said she was a good teacher. He liked her. We asked if he would take a polygraph, and he was really cooperative with us. He was underage, so we had to get his parents' permission to have him take a polygraph, and they were willing to do so. On all the high points of the questions, he did all right on them. He didn't fail the major question, did you shoot Belinda? But he just never could seem to pass every question. And we ended up taking 3 different polygraphs, and we were ready to take a 4th. And finally, his father stepped in and says, enough is enough. He's been on the machine 3 times. You ought to be able to get your answers by now. Unfortunately, we found out he may have been doing some marijuana at the time that could affect the outcome of the polygraph.
He was a 16-year-old kid who was nervous, and no one told him not to smoke some dope before he took the polygraph. While the investigators are still looking into this new name of Riley Joe Sanders, more information about this relationship that David Temple might be having with another teacher at his school, Heather Scott, comes forward.
During our investigation, we had learned that David and Heather were communicating a lot through email on the school's computer. So it was decided we'd go check with the DA and see if we could get a subpoena for their emails.
The investigators were able to access the school emails between David Temple and Heather Scott. David Temple writes, "When you look as good as you do, the women are pissed and the men are all chasing." So they got some flirting going on.
After reading some of the emails, they had been having an affair for a while. This wasn't a one-night stand. As a matter of fact, they had spent the weekend together New Year's Eve when David was supposedly hunting.
We also saw that Miss Scott had sent out an email to David telling him he should delete his emails to her.
What are they trying to hide? And maybe there is way more to this relationship than he's ever told anybody, which, kind of gives you a motive.
Heather Scott came to the office. My part was to get a little more detail about their relationship. Heather didn't want to admit that she was sleeping with David. Everyone knew that his wife was pregnant, and she didn't want people knowing that he was actually coming to her house on a regular basis. Heather said at one point they had tried to break it off, but after a day or 2, they were back together and it was just like it was. I mentioned that if he's a suspect, you would be considered the motive. And I'll never forget, she just stopped at one point and said, "You think that he killed his wife for me?" It took something for me to continue the interview and not be ugly to her, because that was very insulting.
I couldn't believe that he would actually cheat on my sister. After that, there's no doubt in my mind, he killed Belinda and Aaron.
Suspicion about David Temple having killed his wife Belinda is growing, and then the investigators get another new piece of information.
We heard from an old classmate of David Temple, his name was Buck, that said he had seen David in the Katy area on the day of Belinda's murder. So we wanted to go out and see what kind of information he had.
Around 5 on the day of the murder, Buck saw David Temple pulled up to the stop sign at Katy-Hockley Cutoff. Buck had been traveling eastbound, and he saw David Temple southbound. He honked his horn and waved, but David didn't respond, possibly didn't even notice him. That was very significant to us because we had video from the Berkshire Brothers. We had the video from Home Depot. And then in the middle of all that, we've got him appearing at this intersection traveling southbound on Katy-Hockley Cutoff, which puts him in an area where his mom and dad live and where there are a lot of rice fields and water retention ponds.
What was he doing up there? What's he doing up north that he's not telling us about?
Was he up there to possibly dispose of a shotgun? On the day of the murder, Buck saw David Temple pulled up to the stop sign at Katy-Hockley Cutoff.
What's he doing up north that he's not telling us about?
Was he up there to possibly dispose of a shotgun?
After searching for a weapon for 3 or 4 days, I called the DA and told him that we just didn't have the smoking gun, and they concluded again that they wouldn't be able to file any charges until we come up with something that would link David Temple to the homicide.
The detectives thought they had enough evidence, but the prosecutors at that time were still thinking that maybe more information would come up. They were still looking for the murder weapon. They were still hoping that something new might break wide open.
And then the Belinda Temple murder case goes cold.
The stress that it put on the whole family, it was really, really tough for me to sit there and know that David Temple murdered my sister, my unborn niece, is still out walking the streets.
At that time, I was the victim advocate in the mayor's office. Belinda's parents, Tom and Carol Lucas, reached out to me for help. We had an organization called Crime Stoppers, and so we were eventually able to put out a reward. I went to the unveiling of a billboard. Tom and Carol were there, Belinda's friends were there. There was one person conspicuously not there, and that was David Temple.
David was not out there trying to find who killed his wife and baby. David went on with his life.
4 months after the murder, David Temple sold the house that he and Melinda had been living in. He bought himself a new pickup truck, and then he bought himself a new house in Richmond, Texas.
2 years after the murder, he married Heather.
Heather ended up being the person who raised Evan.
Belinda should have been raising Evan. I didn't want to be around her. It's not that I didn't love Evan. I love Evan.
So Belinda's family had no further connection or relationship at all with Evan.
It was tough. Month to month, year to year, just dealing with, is this case ever Gonna be taking a draw.
And then a case a lot like this one starts hitting the news all over the country, the Laci Peterson murder.
There's a lot of similarities in the Laci Peterson case and the Temple case. They were both pregnant, both school teachers. Both their husbands were having affairs.
In late 2004, the Peterson case goes to trial, and Scott is ultimately convicted of murdering Laci and their unborn child.
That gets people around the Katy, Houston area taking another look at the Belinda Temple case.
We wanted justice. Laci Peterson was getting it. We wanted it for Belinda.
Tom Lucas, Belinda's dad, called the district attorney of Harris County, Chuck Rosenthal, and told Chuck, how come California can get a verdict on a case like this, but y'all can't do your job here in Harris County? Chuck Rosenthal called me and said, Kelly, do you know what case Tom Lucas is talking about? And I said, yeah, that's that Katy football coach case. And I remember taking it home, and I read it over the weekend, and that's how I first got the case. Rhonda, how you doing?
Kelly was a top prosecutor in the office. She had a great conviction rate for murder cases.
Today, I would like to see the David Temple evidence. Oh, wow. It's a lot.
Kelly Siegler already had a notch in her belt for getting a conviction in the Susan Wright case, a pretty high-profile, dramatic case.
So here's his door. And then, you know how important this door was to that case?
Kelly's marching orders were to take a look at this case with a fresh set of eyes and see if she thought that there was enough there to move forward with an indictment.
So here's his boxes. Oh, wow. These three right here?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Rhonda.
Uh-huh.
When I read the file, I did the same thing I do now on Cold Justice. I'm taking notes for to-dos and questions and things that need to be addressed. Wow. These are the shoes that Belinda had on that day when she got off of work, still on her feet, 9 months pregnant when she went upstairs and was found in her closet. And all of her girlfriends and her sister talked about how the first thing Belinda would do when she'd get home every day is kick off her shoes, especially when they were swollen as they would have been being so pregnant. David Temple told law enforcement back then that she was taking a nap. Well, I don't think very many women 9 months pregnant take a nap with their shoes on. And she still had her glasses on. Look, that's still the brain matter and blood on her glasses. The timeline was always the big thing to make a jury understand in this case. Using the initial statement David Temple gave the night that Belinda was murdered, along with all the reports and everything gathered by the sheriff's department up until this point in the investigation, this is what was known at the time I started working on the case. David Temple said that Belinda stopped at his parents' house to pick up some soup and then got home at 3:45 p.m. Then she went upstairs to take a nap. David Temple says that Evan started to feel better, so he took him to a park to play, but he doesn't remember which park it was. Then to a grocery store. The timestamp showed David and Evan coming to Brookshire Brothers at 4:34 p.m. and leaving at 4:38 p.m., where they bought a bag of cat food and a Coke. Next, David Temple said that they drove to the Home Depot, which is about a 10-minute drive from Brookshire Brothers. But he and Evan weren't captured on the Home Depot video until 36 minutes later, which makes no sense. Until Buck Bendeman comes forward, who says that he sees David Temple up in the area north of Home Depot and Brookshire Brothers, close to the house where he grew up, close to all the rice fields, at around 5 p.m. at the intersection of Morton Ranch Road and Katy Hockley Cutoff. Katy Hockley Cutoff, Morton Ranch Road intersection. Why didn't David Temple mention that? And what was he doing up there? Buck Bendeman is the key to this case. And then you throw in the staging of the burglary, the motive for the affair, and I got all finished with it. And I thought to myself, I would file this case right now. This case is like the pinnacle of circumstantial evidence cases. And a lot of prosecutors want more than that before they'll do their job. To me, circumstantial cases are beautiful. There might be more work required to tell the story as opposed to a DNA case or a confession case, but they're the best cases there are because the truth is in the details. Just after Thanksgiving 2004, 5 years after Belinda's murder, I said, all right, let's call the sheriff's department and let them know it's time to arrest David Temple.
That was a great day in all our lives.
Mr. Temple was pulled over on his way to work.
I would have loved to seen his reaction when they put him in that patrol car.
And as we're driving downtown, all I said was, you know what this is about, right? And he said, no, what? I said, Belinda. He's like, you got to be kidding me. This crap's been going on for almost 6 years now.
He was taken into custody and he quickly bonded out. Temple family, who's of means, realizes once Kelly Siegler gets involved, we got to make sure that we're going after the best defense, and that's Dick DeGuerin.
I'm an innocent man, and I have all the faith in the legal system.
Doesn't get any better than hiring one of the most famous attorneys, not just in Houston, not just in Texas, but nationally.
He's a fantastic attorney. He's one of the best. And him and Kelly going at it is a sight to see.
When I tried the Dora Goldberg case, gone up against Dick DeGuerin, the trial lasted 4 weeks and I lost 10 pounds, but I learned more in that trial watching him at work than I ever learned in my life. And the funny thing that nobody knows is right after the Dora Goldberg trial, he told me, you know, Kelly, you ought to run for DA. You did a good job. But by the time we went to trial on David Temple, I had tried and won a couple of other cases against Dick DeGuerin and his firm, so he didn't really like me as much anymore.
Because if anybody was going to put this puzzle together and then actually prove it to a jury, it was going to be Kelly Siegler. It was going to be the battle of the Titans. Going to the trial, you had a line to get in. It was like a standing room only crowd.
I think that the old adage is true that you have to open with a bang. Belinda Temple was discovered lying on the floor on her tummy with her face down, dead of a shotgun wound to the back of her head. And the other life that perished that day was a perfectly healthy 6-pound little baby girl with its heart beating inside her mommy's womb. Usually we go chronologically with life events. In this case, chronologically would be starting with when they got married and the downfall of their marriage and he meets Heather, and then the murder. But I didn't. I decided to start with the crime scene. The call goes out, law enforcement shows up, and what do they see? And start with that to explain what they saw, what they didn't see, what doesn't make sense, and then go back in time to build the rest of the story. The other thing that opening statements have to do, I believe, is to address the weakness of your case. The truth is in the details.
She explains that she has no smoking gun. She has no forensic evidence, but she has a lot of little bits and pieces to the puzzle, and everything points at one person, David Temple.
5 months before Belinda was killed, well, David Temple met a new woman. On January the 8th of 1999, a Friday, the defendant says to Heather Scott, you know I'm falling in love with you. 3 days later, Belinda Temple was executed in the back of the head in the home where she lived with this man. You never know when you give an opening statement if the defense is going to give one at all, but Dick gives an opening statement right behind me.
It's true that David had an affair, but David would never leave Belinda.
I'm going, what? Then he says that the glass in the back door broke because it slammed against this hutch that the Temples had behind the back door.
And as he goes into the house, he throws the door open.
So the defense tries to I guess, give an explanation for why the glass wasn't where investigators thought it should be, with somebody punching in the glass.
After Dick tries to explain the glass from the back door being in the wrong place for a burglary, he then points his finger at the person that he believes is the one who broke into the house and killed Belinda.
The evidence will show that they ignored other leads.
And that suspect is Riley Joe Sanders.
Opening statements end, and the prosecutors start calling their witnesses.
I questioned Dean Holtke a lot about all the evidence at the scene, all the unusual things that he saw, but we spent an extra amount of time with him talking about the way the glass was spewed from the door once it was broken.
The glass was all facing in an angle consistent with the door being open. Because if the glass had been shot with the door shut, it would have gone straight ahead.
On cross-examination, Dick tried really hard to pick apart Dean's theory of why that glass ended up where it did.
He was trying to say David came in like a linebacker and threw the door open. If the door slammed into the hutch, which there's no evidence that it did, because there was little figurines on this hutch that they weren't falling down, you would expect if the door hit there, you'd see a bunch of glass right there.
Besides the evidence having to do with the glass, another huge piece of the case had to do with the Temple's dog, Shaka. And there was a lot of testimony from a lot of witnesses about how vicious that dog was.
Dick DeGuerin was trying to tell us that David had the dog locked up in the garage while he was gone that day. But why would he do that with his wife in the house? I mean, that's her protection.
If Shaka had been in the backyard that day, there is no way any burglar would have gotten into that house to get to Belinda.
Don't you think that if David Temple could have said back in 1999, well, the burglar got into my house because my dog was in the garage, he would have said it. The dog was in the backyard, and how in the world did a burglar ever get past that dog?
Then we got into the interview that was done with David Temple the night of Belinda's murder. The beautiful thing about Chuck Leitner's interview of David Temple is that David Temple is locked into his story. The problem with his story is that even though he's on videotape and we know when he was at the Brookshire Brothers and at the Home Depot, there is an extraordinarily long period of time between those two places. That's when we call Buck Benjamin to the stand. I argued to the jury, the reason Buck Benjamin saw David Temple is because David Temple drove where the rice fields are to get rid of the shotgun, and as he's coming back to hurry up and alibi himself, that's when Buck Benjamin saw him.
When he leaves here at 4:38 and he gets to Home Depot at 5:14, that's 22 plus 14, that's 36 minutes unaccounted for. And it just so happens to coincide with the coincidence that Buck Benjamin sees him at that intersection in that time period.
After we got all through presenting the evidence having to do with the timeline of that day when Belinda was murdered, then we moved on to the part talking about motive. We tried to make the jury understand the relationship between Belinda and David Temple, who they are, what their marriage is all about, and we did that through bringing in Temple's, at the time, very best friends, Quentin and Tammy Harlan. They were the ones who best could talk about the way David treated Belinda behind closed doors, about the way David Temple called her fat, the way David Temple told her that she was white trash from Nacogdoches. And then Quentin talks about, at school, the happy hours where they were flirting with the other teachers, specifically Heather, and how that relationship between David Temple and Heather evolved.
When we first learned about Heather Scott, the hot young teacher that David Temple was showing interest in, she kind of blows it off like it was just a casual relationship. But by the time David Temple's trial comes around, she's married to him and is now Heather Scott Temple.
Heather and David Temple had been married for 6 years. She was not cooperative. She did not want to come. She was subpoenaed to come to court, and she did. But she was not my friend in this case.
Everybody's wondering, what is she going to say when she takes the stand?
You have a marital privilege if conversations you have are said while you're married. David Temple was not married to Heather at the time the murder happened. She takes the stand, and I have to pull the words out of her to get her to answer the question. The answers came eventually. I think the significance of her is the motive. She admits that they were flirting heavy. She admits that he tells her he loves her on Friday, 3 days before the murder. She talks about Valentine's Day after the murder. They're doing the roses and chocolates thing. They get caught being seen out at dinner with each other. She even acknowledged that he wasn't crying and sad. And then I called a witness that I never knew I was gonna have. An opening statement. Dick brought up that David Temple only ever owned a 20-gauge shotgun, and that made the news. A man named Clinton Stockdick, who grew up with David Temple's younger brother, called in, and he told me about how he hunted with the Temples his whole childhood, and he was mad that David Temple would try to say that he only ever owned a 20-gauge shotgun when Clinton Stockdick knew better. But I had a new witness, and I remember all the Temples family's faces. They were mad. I rested my case, and then Dick began presenting his case.
Dick DeGuerin tries to refocus the jury. And so he talked about the hutch.
Well, what he didn't know is that Tom Lucas had the hutch at his house. So we let Dick do his thing, and then Dean drove up to Nacogdoches and got the hutch and brought it back. And then we put it in the courtroom to blow up their theory.
You can imagine the surprise in the courtroom, particularly from the defense. I'm sure they never expected to see the hutch again.
And Dean's able to show how the dings on the door don't match the dings on the hutch, and the hutch has nothing to do with why that glass is broken.
Then Dick DeGuerin makes a bold move. He puts David Temple on the stand.
You don't normally see defendants charged with murder taking the stand, especially someone who's charged with murdering his pregnant wife.
Maybe the thought was David Temple's Mr. Clean Cut. And if he does a really good job testifying for himself, it might cause jurors to have doubt. David Temple does a really good job on direct, maintaining his composure. You don't see any flashes of temper. He speaks wonderfully of Belinda and of Evan and of Heather.
Then Kelly stepped up to cross-examine David.
I was just hoping to poke a few holes in that veneer.
Watching Kelly was like watching a shark seizing onto a prey.
Kelly laid out the timeline and really grilled David on where he was and what he had done on the day that Belinda was murdered.
I asked him all the questions everybody wanted to know. Why'd you take your son to the park if he was sick? Why did you go to that store that was 6 miles away? Why did you feel the urgent need to buy cat food and a Coke? Why'd you go to Home Depot because you didn't buy anything or even look at anything in the store that day? He didn't have answers. I asked David Temple about Buck Benjamin, but David Temple kept insisting that he went straight to Home Depot when he and Evan left Brookshire Brothers.
An interesting moment in the trial was when Kelly Siegler asked David, "You were trying to save the life of your wife and your baby. Why didn't you have any blood on you?"
Don't you think if David Temple really happened upon the closet and found Belinda on the floor in her own pool of blood, and there would have been a speck of blood on his whole body? He says he checked her pulse, her carotid artery.
You know how to do CPR?
Yes.
Okay, I want you to do CPR for that baby.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
But there's no blood on him.
How is there not a speck of blood on you? How does that happen? And the best answer he could come up with was, I don't know. I don't know. Really, there should have been blood on him somewhere.
Did he really try to save her?
Objection beyond the record.
I never got so much exercise in my life, standing up and down for all the objections that were made by Dick DeGuerin.
We objected and asked that you stay in the record.
Then Kelly asks David Temple about his relationship with Heather Scott.
I asked if he had sex with Heather during his marriage to Belinda, and he said he had. That New Year's Eve weekend, telling Heather that he loved her on Friday, and golly, our burglars burglarized in his house 3 days later, and his wife ends up dead.
The questions Kelly's asking, he's setting the scene. She's showing what was going on in the Temple household between David and Belinda in the weeks leading up to her murder.
It was quite a sight to see. David Temple doesn't like being challenged by anybody. David Temple thinks the world revolves around him, and to have little Kelly Siegler, this pit bull, just firing off.
I think that the points that I needed to make were made. You just can't ignore the coincidences. When David Temple got off the stand, I'm pretty sure he was glad that was over. Throughout his whole case, Dick DeGuerin kept coming back to the idea that Riley Joe Sanders, the kid living next door, was the person who killed Belinda Temple.
So then Kelly calls a surprise witness.
We called Riley Joe Sanders as a rebuttal witness. We knew Dick DeGuerin was going to blame it on Riley Joe Sanders. He always blamed it on Riley Joe Sanders. So when Dick presented his case and his defense was that Riley Joe Sanders was the murderer, at that point, because he's put on evidence, we have the right to call rebuttal witnesses. That is when we called Riley Joe Sanders to the stand. I asked Riley Joe, what did you think of Miss Temple? And it was clear to everyone in that courtroom how much he liked Belinda as a neighbor, as a lady, as a friend, and as his teacher. He understood why she told his parents he was skipping so much school. It was clear to everybody in that courtroom that this 16-year-old kid had cooperated completely and had no motive in the entire universe to want to kill Belinda Temple. Riley Joe Sanders talks about how it felt when he heard Miss Temple was killed, how it felt to be blamed for it, what he went through. It was wonderful. The 16-year-old neighbor kid they want to blame it on obviously didn't do this, blew up in Dick DeGuerin's face, and it was a beautiful thing to watch. After Riley Joe Sanders testified on rebuttal, of course, Dick was able to cross-examine him. But yet he never asked him the million-dollar question, did you kill Belinda Temple? Are you the one who fired that shotgun into the brain of Belinda Temple and her unborn baby? He never asked anything close to that. Why didn't he? I think we all know the answer to that.
The first thing that I told y'all a month ago was the truth is in the details. The truth is in the details. And what that means is the lies that this man told and the things that he chose not to say, the actions that this man took and the actions that he chose not to take are the little pieces that are the truth. That family has decided they have the right to grant absolution to this defendant. And they want you to do the same thing. The problem with that is it overlooks the truth and it denies justice to Belinda and Aaron.
That was the longest final argument I ever gave. It was over an hour long, but this case, to me, had so much detailed circumstantial evidence, and I needed to remind the jury of all those details one more time so that they could try to remember all of them when they went back to deliberate.
Buck Benjamin is circumstantial evidence because he's got no reason to lie. And the circumstance just happens to fit during the time period that David Temple forgot to tell the police about in between Alibi 1 and Alibi 2. And what Buck Benjamin said 9 years ago, remember, was he didn't know David Temple or what he drove after high school. Medium blue, short wheelbase, single cab, Chevrolet, 91 or 92 truck. Got it exactly right. There was nothing Dick DeGuerin could do about it because that is a circumstance that's unchangeable because it's the truth. And Mr. DeGuerin tells you that the explanation for all this circumstantial evidence is that Riley Joe Sanders is the killer. Riley Joe Sanders wants to kill Belinda Temple because she told his parents he was missing a lot of school for his own good, or because there were some broken beer bottles out on the street one day. Mr. DeGuerin wants that to be a reasonable doubt. Please, you know with all your heart David Temple is guilty of murder. And today, almost 9 years later, it's time to let the souls of Belinda and Aaron in heaven rest in peace.
It was a very scary situation. I had no idea what to expect.
It's hard to predict. You've got 12 people trying to decipher a very difficult case without a I got you moment. I'm hoping that they see what we see, that David Temple was the only one who had the motive and had the means and wanted to kill Belinda.
The trial lasted for about a month. The jury came back in just a few hours.
Mr. Foreman, I understand you have a verdict. If you'll pass it to the bailiff, please. We, the jury, find the defendant, David Mark Temple, guilty of murder as charged in the indictment.
When they came back and said David Temple is guilty, you could watch the relief on Belinda's family, and you could see it visibly. Temple family was just dumbfounded. They were floored. I mean, they stormed out.
The jury went back to deliberate on punishment, and they came back and gave him a life sentence and a $10,000 fine, which is the very most he could get. And the jury told me afterwards they wanted to stand up and clap at the job Riley Joe Sanders did defending himself and his innocence.
When we got the guilty verdict, I mean, it was such relief. I don't know if there's any words to describe how happy we were to finally get justice for Belinda and our niece, Aaron.
When the David Temple trial ended, I went back to doing my job in special crimes. And it was in January 2008 that I filed to run for DA. Getting justice means working with law enforcement and knowing how to be a prosecutor. It's what I've always done. Dick kept saying to the media, Kelly Siegler has finally convicted an innocent man. She'll do anything to win. But before that, the media loved me. And I saw how they turned and what they would write. I thought, what's happening? David Temple's guilty as hell. And now all of a sudden I'm a monster and I did something wrong? What? Dick DeGuerin was trying to make sure I didn't become the DA. And I didn't, I lost. After I lost the race for DA, I didn't know what I was going to do next. Eventually, I took a job as the special prosecutor working with the Wharton County DA's office. But I knew that I knew how to work on cold cases. So around 2012, I worked on the episode that would become the pilot for Cold Justice. It felt good. That was what I knew how to do. That was what I was good at. And then the Temple case started up all over again.
8 years after David was convicted, the defense announces that they have a new witness come forward. And that witness can prove that David Temple is innocent of Belinda's murder.
After a case goes through the normal process of appeals, it should be over. The only way to keep it from being over is to claim that you have newly discovered evidence or that something happened with your prosecutor during the trial that rose to the level of prosecutorial misconduct that necessitates a new trial. Now David Temple's defense team is claiming they have new evidence. A brand new witness named Daniel Glasscock, who supposedly heard Riley Joe Sanders say that he killed Belinda Temple.
All of a sudden, the case is in the news all over again.
They eventually get Daniel Glasscock in to testify about what he says Riley Joe Sanders told him about the day Belinda Temple was murdered.
When he went to the house, as he went upstairs, the dog attacked him. He shot the dog, heard Belinda, put the dog in the closet, panicked, and ran.
But we all know the Temple's dog was never shot. So that all blows up. So then the defense's only avenue left to get a new trial is to say prosecutorial misconduct because I withheld evidence. Because when you can't prove your client is innocent because they're not, that's the throwdown answer for a defense lawyer, is to claim the prosecutor forgot to give you this, or hid something, or cheated or lied, or did something improper. At this point, Dick DeGuerin no longer represented David Temple. These new claims were being brought by Stanley Schneider and Casey Gautreaux.
Prosecutorial misconduct and the way it played in this case was the defense claimed Kelly Siegler did not turn over all the evidence about a potential alternative suspect, Riley Joe Sanders. It's called a Brady violation.
Brady evidence is any evidence that is exculpatory or mitigates punishment or affects the credibility of a witness. All of those things are things that have to be turned over by the prosecution to the defense. In my opinion, I turned over every single thing that anyone could define as exculpatory or Brady in this case. And the defense says, well, she had 38 instances of doing something wrong. No, I didn't. Look at them one by one by one. Not one of those is truly exculpatory evidence. I mean, here's one, that I didn't turn over the FBI profiler's report, where they say usually a white male did it, he doesn't like his mom and he's unemployed. Not kidding, that I didn't turn that over. And it goes just like that through all 38 of them. We didn't hide anything from Dick DeGuerin, but the entire case file was not turned over because back in 2005, Dick DeGuerin asked for an examining trial to see if a judge finds probable cause to indict. But if you ask for an examining trial, the office policy at that time dictated that the file would then become closed to you. That was the policy. Dick DeGuerin used to be a Harris County prosecutor. He grew up in the courthouse world just like I did. He knows office policy. I remember saying to him, why do you want to do that, Dick? You know that the file's going to become closed to you if you do that. And he said to me, don't you tell me how to do my job. Like, copy that.
On my left is the complete investigative report. This was never seen.
You know, what can you do? You just have to kind of suck it up and take it. And I was also trying to be strong for Belinda's family, because they would call me going, Kelly, what are we going to do?
And now there's another hearing called about whether or not David Temple should get another trial.
I was called to testify to explain all of my actions while I handled this case and to answer all the accusations that I hadn't given them certain pieces of evidence. Many people told me, you need to have a lawyer. And I thought, why? I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not going to walk in that courtroom like a defendant with a lawyer. But you know what? I was treated like a defendant, exactly like a defendant. I testified for 5 full days.
And on December 2016, the Texas Court of Appeals grants David Temple a new trial.
The ruling came down that there was going to be another trial based on prosecutorial misconduct. I just couldn't believe it. I was mad. On the Court of Criminal Appeals, 4 judges voted that David Temple gets a new trial. 1 judge concurred with that. 3 judges said no, and 1 abstained because he used to be a prosecutor in our office. So that's how close that ruling was to make the proclamation and the finding he gets a new trial.
It's kind of a gut punch to get word that that's going to happen.
Back in 2007, we got the guilty verdict. I thought it was over. He was going to prison for life, and I could go on with my life. I never thought that the ruling would ever be overturned. Never, never would have dreamed that could have happened.
I remember all the accusations about all that evidence that I supposedly didn't disclose and hid. And you would call me, and we did tell him. It came out in the trial.
Yes.
It was all a bunch of smoke and mirrors.
I wanted justice for Belinda and Aaron. Belinda was everything to me. She was my protector when she was here, and I'm going to try to do everything to continue to get justice for Belinda. I feel that's my job.
The frustrating thing is all that you've been through and what all you had to go through with the criminal justice system and how it let you down and how we let you down.
You did not let me down, Kelly.
David Temple is now released on bond. He's out of prison, he's a free man again, and awaiting a new trial.
I was scared for my life. I was the only one in the Lucas family that testified. I feel like I had a huge role in getting him convicted. My brothers had me go out and buy 2 guns. I mean, he killed Belinda and his daughter. Why wouldn't he do it to somebody else?
The defense is saying that they had all this new evidence, and everybody's wondering, what is it?
If there was new evidence in the file on the case that proved that David Temple was innocent, I wanted to know what it was. Maybe I had judged this case wrong.
We're waiting for justice to be served once and for all, and for the people that put me there and lied and cheated to be held accountable.
David.
Yeah.
When we were waiting to hear who was going to be the prosecutor for the new trial, I was very worried that somebody wouldn't appreciate all the details to the case. And David Temple may be walking free and have gotten away with 2 murders. So when I heard that the case had been assigned to Lisa Tanner and Bill Turner, I started crying because I was so relieved. Bill Turner's a guy that a lot of us have learned from. Lisa Tanner was more of my companion. We grew up together as prosecutors. She is phenomenal in the courtroom. By this point, 15 years had passed since Belinda Temple's murder, but for Lisa and Bill, all the documents, all the exhibits, everything was still perfectly preserved.
When we got the case, the defense attorney, Stanley Schneider, had a huge advantage. He knew the case backwards and forwards, and he started filing motions for speedy trials and motions to have Mr. Temple deposed as quickly as possible. And we kept telling him, we gotta have time to learn this thing. Give us a break here. So we did what we would always do in a case like this, start from the beginning. When Bill and I got the case, David Temple was innocent as far as we were concerned.
We walked through all of the evidence.
Lisa and Bill saw all of the evidence the same way that the rest of us did and that I presented at the first trial.
And came to the conclusion, look, if you want to follow the presumption that David Temple is innocent, the door is just closed, no matter which way you move.
David Temple's timeline made no sense. His affair with Heather, the dog, that he never had a 12-gauge shotgun, all of it. We all saw it the same way.
In the end, we were convinced David Temple was guilty.
Lisa and Bill planned to present the same evidence that I presented at the first trial, but they wanted to present a couple of things a little differently. And they're bringing in a glass expert to make sure that that too is presented even clearer in the minds of the jurors.
In the new trial, the first thing we did was looked at the home invasion part of it. It just didn't make sense. I think there's all kinds of reasons to show that David Temple killed Belinda Temple as soon as she got home. On the night of the killing, David Temple said he drove into the garage, shut the door, got his son out, put him on a bicycle because he was just going to go tell Belinda they were home. Same as in the first trial. We were able to show that there was no room to ride a bicycle with two cars in a two-car garage and the door down. So that didn't make any sense. And then we called Angela Vielma. She testified in the first trial. What was significant about Angie was the timing.
Angie was a girl that lived in the neighborhood several blocks away. The day the murder was committed, Angie had a fight with her boyfriend, and she decided that she was going to leave and go to her friend Roseanne's house. And Roseanne lived across the street from the Temples. Angie started walking, but she had to stop before she could pass the Temple driveway because David Temple was pulling into his garage.
And she had the time pegged almost exactly at 5:25. That ends up being important because David Temple's statement was that at 5:25, he got out of his car, put Evan on a bicycle, took a few steps into the backyard, saw that the door was broken open, grabbed his son, and ran across to the Ruggieros. All of those things would have drawn the attention to anybody. But Angela walked by their house at 5:25, just walked across the street just a few hundred feet, and then sat on the porch for 10 minutes, and none of that happened.
The next time David Temple is seen is around 5:35 p.m. when he takes his son over to his neighbors, the Ruggieros, prior to calling 911.
Somebody's broken into my house and my wife has been shot.
So that put David Temple in the house for approximately 10 or 11 minutes. It is our position that for 10 minutes, David Temple was staging the house. He made sure things were just right before he let third parties know that this had happened.
And then we felt like the jury had to hear the situation with the dog. There's three places Shaka could have been. Shaka could have been in the garage, Shaka could have been in the backyard, or Shaka could have been in the house. As the garage door was going down, Angie told us she saw David Temple's legs walking beside the truck. One thing that was significant to me was she saw his legs, but she didn't see a dog. So Shaka was not in the garage because he would have been right there with David Temple if he had been in the garage. Also, in the crime scene pictures, you see a bowl full of wet dog food. And I have big dogs. I know how big dogs are. We told the jury, there's no big dog that's gonna leave wet food in his bowl. That doesn't make sense.
So, same as in the first trial. And if the dog was in the backyard, no stranger's gonna get by that dog to get to Belinda.
Another huge crossroads was when we enlisted the help of Dr. Ravi, the glass expert.
Ravi Shandar's amazing. I mean, he's the guy that does stress of all objects. So he's the guy that keeps our airplanes in the air. But one of his specialties was measuring what happens to glass when it breaks. One of the defensive theories was that when David Temple ran back to the house and discovered Belinda's body, he went through the house with such force that it bounced against the hutch, and that caused the glass to discharge into the living room.
Dr. Ravi came back and said that couldn't be.
The glass break expert agreed with the testimony that was brought up in the first trial.
It became obvious that it was staged. And the next question then is, does Belinda Temple have anybody with a motive to kill her? She had no enemies. There was only one person with a motive to kill Belinda Temple, and that was David Temple.
Just like in the first trial, Lisa and Bill knew that they were going to have to call Heather Scott Temple to the stand.
During the first few days of the trial, we find out that Heather filed for divorce from David. Wow. What timing.
I was in Florida working on a case on cold justice, and I got my text messages, breaking news that Heather Scott Temple filed for a divorce. And I was like, oh my God, good for you. Good for you.
The issue is, okay, how does this influence her testimony? Is she going to stick with her original testimony? Is she taking an opposite position? Is her motive now to try to hurt David Temple? Did she hold something back in the first trial? Is she going to tell us now?
No one had any idea what she was going to say this time. The hope was maybe there was some other little piece that she had always known but didn't come forward with that might come up in the second trial. But she was consistent. She told what she knew, and she did what she needed to.
I think all in all, the way she testified at the first trial was accurate as to what the testimony was at the second trial, so we had no indication that her divorce influenced her testimony.
In my opinion, she didn't know that fool was going to go execute his wife and child, and then she's stuck with the rest of her life ruined because he's that selfish.
And then, just like in the first trial, the defense pointed at Riley Joe Sanders as an alternate suspect.
It certainly appears from all of the records that in the first trial, the defense did receive at least some information about the investigation into Riley Joe Sanders. And by the time we got the case, the defense attorney, he had the whole file. I mean, he even had Kelly's notes. But in an abundance of caution, we copied it again and gave it all to him a second time.
Riley Joe Sanders is now 36 years old when he's called to testify again in this case.
We've got nothing to fear about Riley Joe Sanders on the stand.
When you met him, you realized a couple of things. Number one, that at the time Belinda was murdered, Riley Joe Sanders had just been a really dumb kid. And then secondly, you realized, this many years later, he was a really nice guy.
He has no motive to kill an 8.5-month pregnant woman.
I understand why the defense made him a scapegoat, but more just from the human level, I just felt so sorry for the guy. His family lost their home. They had to hire a lawyer and they used all their savings over this case.
And then Stanley Schneider said the defense rests. Think about that. The defense had everything, the entire file, including my work notes. And with all that, everything, there was not one scrap of new evidence they presented in their big new trial that they'd been squawking for all these years. No new evidence.
There wasn't anything that the defense did we weren't expecting.
So to all those people out there that say I hid something, where in the hell is it?
It is our position that Belinda Temple was killed almost immediately when she entered her home. The testimony from David Temple was that when Belinda got home, she was tired and went up to sleep. When her body was found, her shoes were still on her feet. Her glasses, which were driving glasses, were still on her head. So she did not kick off her shoes. She didn't go up to bed and take off her glasses. She was killed before either of those two things happened. And David Temple did it.
When the second jury went out to deliberate, a lot of people were pretty nervous. Nobody knew if they were going to come to a different conclusion than the first.
I was working a case in Fort Myers, Florida, and I got a text message. He's guilty again. And I went to my room at the hotel and started crying. It was the exact same case and trial and evidence, and he was just as guilty as he was in 2007. I wanted to scream, I told you. It was relief, and it was anger.
The immediate things that came to my mind are justice for Belinda Temple, justice for the Lucas family, justice for Riley Joe Sanders, justice for Kelly Sigler.
We went to the punishment phase, and the punishment range was 5 years to 99 years or life.
Well, Evan Temple took the stand. Here's somebody that's lost their mother and their dad's going to be in the penitentiary forever. And so for him pleading for his father's life, I think it's a significant thing.
We were very careful and treated him with kid gloves.
What a horrible situation to be in, to lose your mom and then have your dad charged with that.
Finally, the jury sends a note that they're deadlocked. In the punishment phase, the judge has to declare a mistrial. So now we're waiting for a retrial on the punishment phase of someone who's been convicted twice of murder.
It broke me. It broke me. I will try my best to keep David in prison.
What happens in March of 2020? COVID. Everything's shut down. And we wait. And we wait. And finally, in April of 2023, the punishment phase resumes.
I went down to the courthouse, and it brought back a lot of emotions, mostly feeling bad that they were all having to do it again. And I was very hopeful that it was finally going to be over with. The jury came back with a verdict in 2 hours.
We, the jury, assess his punishment at confinement in the Institutional Division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for life.
The jury came back with a punishment of life in the penitentiary as well as the maximum fine of $10,000, which meant that the jury was outraged. I mean, there's no reason to fine somebody if they get a life sentence, right?
You made a decision to kill Belinda, and that was all your decision. I want you to think about that the rest of your life when you sit in prison or rot in hell.
3 trials, 3 juries, and finally, David Temple is back where he belongs.
So much relief, so much being able to just say, thank God, finally, it's over.
You want to see all your cases cleared, but some of them are going to touch you in a different way.
I have never in my career ever seen a case like this. I hope to hell I never see a case like this again.
Disappointed by David Temple's sentence, the defense team plans to appeal on several grounds.
It's not over till it's over.
I already booked my appointment with the parole board dude, and we're all going to be there, and you ain't getting out.
We got him. He's where he needs to be.
If you could say whatever you wanted to say to David Temple today, what would you say?
You didn't have to do this. Could have gotten a divorce. David, you robbed Evan and Aaron of a wonderful mother.
What would you say to other family members out there?
Just never give up. I mean, it took us over 24 years, but we did get justice for Belinda. Just don't give up. I feel like this case would still be cold if you wouldn't have went forward with this case. I truly believe that, and I love you for that. I've told you before, you remind me of Belinda a lot. With your determination, your heart of gold, I love you, Kelly.
For you to tell me that, there couldn't be a better compliment.
All right, baby. Bye.
I give Belinda's family an awful lot of credit. They never backed down. They sought justice, and they were there every single day for 3 trials, 24 years.
36 jurors have found him guilty. Think about that. David Temple committed this murder because he's that selfish. He thought he could commit a murder rather than get a divorce and have to split up custody and child support payments. And his family accepted it and moved on and forgave him. With this case, I learned a lot about how it feels when things go wrong with the criminal justice system. Sometimes it is unfair. I saw what it did to the sheriff's department, to Belinda's family, to me. We all got a whole lot more cynical and upset with the system as a result of this case, I think. But you know what? There were people out there who wanted to make sure that Belinda Temple got justice along with her baby, and there were a lot of them.
A sweet and pure college student.
She was literally the most innocent and genuine person I've ever known.
Viciously attacked in her own home.
What I saw was just absolutely horrific. I mean, this child went through hell.
Who would have a reason to want to kill this girl?
Police are desperate to find the killer before he strikes again.
It's panic.
There is somebody capable of doing what they did to Missy out there, and we don't have them.
But a dark trail of evidence.
He actually wound up weeping out of in a fetal position.
This is bizarre. This is strange.
Leads them to a suspect.
This was someone hiding in plain sight.
They could have never imagined.
No one would have known that, not anybody.
The city of Arlington is the home of 2 professional sports teams and a major amusement park.
There's something for everybody. And if you can't find something to do, then you've got a problem.
But in early April 1994, this idyllic community was rocked to its core.
911.
And it started when police received a 911 call from the Holly Park apartment complex.
911, 325.
Woke up 3:30 in the morning, smelling smoke. I walk into my living room. There's so much smoke that I can't see. It's panic. There's a fire. We need to get out.
Residents quickly evacuate the building as firefighters arrive to battle the blaze.
You're totally helpless. You just sit there and watch everything go up in flames.
I still think about it. Just how close I came to dying.
Firefighters track the fire to its source, an apartment on the 2nd floor. Once inside, they make a horrific discovery.
Firefighters discovered a body in the bedroom. This was not just someone falling asleep in bed smoking. This was something more.
Homicide investigators are quickly summoned and try to make sense of the devastating scene.
I was informed of what the fire department had found and what they reported. We had a body inside of a burning home. Detective Stanton and I make entry into the apartment. The fire is out, but there's still a lot of damage.
Virtually everything has got like a coating of this black, nasty soot.
Fire marshals could actually smell the gasoline and were able to see pour patterns. This was an intentionally set fire.
The trail of destruction leads all the way to the bed.
What I saw was just absolutely horrific. I've seen bad crime scenes, and I've seen crime scenes involving people that were burnt in fires. This was elevated. A young lady who you could see, even with the smoke damage and the burn damage, you could still see that this was a victim of a very brutal sexual assault. The body was laying on her back on the bed. The positioning is consistent with sexual assault. She had trauma to her face, as though she had been physically assaulted. Clearly there was a puncture mark in the middle of her chest. This child went through hell.
It was like nothing I've ever seen. You know, who would do something as horrible as this?
A lot of evidence was destroyed simply because of the fire damage. But we found what we believe might have been the murder weapon. There was a knife in the sink.
But fire damage to the knife has robbed investigators of the forensic evidence needed to link it to the killer.
Had that fire not been set, we probably would have had latent prints. No telling what we would have had.
Investigators collect the knife for testing and manage to salvage some papers that survived the inferno. For detectives, the most important goal is to identify their victim.
We found out that that apartment was in fact leased and occupied by one occupant, identified as Missy Gruball, 19-year-old college student from Burleson.
I can remember standing on the lawn, and I said, "There's Missy's car, but she's not out here with us. She was not accounted for."
So we had a general idea who our victim was, but that was not confirmed.
This body was so distorted that they had to use a forensic odontologist to confirm Missy as the victim.
Once we've identified the victim as Missy Gruball, we talked to her family in Burleson, and it's gut-wrenching. Missy's mother was devastated.
I had a daughter myself. That sort of hits home.
As investigators meet with Missy's family, word of her death spreads through the small community.
When I heard the news, my heart just dropped. Missy was so innocent and so pure and such an honest soul. She was so much fun, very friendly, nurturing. She would have given anything to help anybody. She was literally the most genuine person I've ever known. We were very active in church, she and I both were. Missy was very strong in her faith, very moral. She was always the person to do the right thing, always.
In high school, her strength went beyond her faith.
Missy was very focused. She was a very hard worker. That's how she was so successful in school. She was in the high school band. She played the French horn, and she was amazing at it.
Even as a teenager, Missy had a clear vision of what she wanted and the drive to get it.
She wanted to go to the University of Texas at Arlington, and she wanted to get her own apartment. But she didn't want to burden her mother financially. So Missy was working to support herself to afford to be able to go to school.
But even though she wanted to stand on her own, Missy's heart stayed close to home.
She probably spoke with her mom every day on the phone. Missy and her mother were very close. They were a team in life and treasured each other.
You cannot describe the pain that Missy's mother went through. But I let her know, I really need you. You're going to help me find who did this to Missy, because she knew her daughter better than probably anybody.
Missy's mother tells detectives what she knows of Missy's activities on the last night of her life.
Well, Missy worked these late hours as a food server. She would always let her mother know that I'm home, I'm safe. On the night of Missy's murder, she called her mother late at night when she got home.
She finished her phone call with her mom and then dispatch getting a phone call that the apartment's on fire, establishing kind of a window as to when the actual murder would have occurred.
Police determined that Missy had been killed sometime between midnight and 3:30 a.m. It's not much for detectives to go on, but when they arrive back in Arlington, they have an unexpected lead waiting.
Once the victim's name had been released, one of our officers came forward and said, I took a report listing your victim.
A week prior to the death, Missy Gruball filed a police report on a guy that's staying with Missy who stole from her, and I'm thinking that very well could be our killer. We need to find this person. We need to talk to him. We need to get him in here as soon as possible.
Coming up, detectives track a dangerous suspect
This individual made threats against her.
and soon uncover a lead they never expected.
It caught my attention immediately. Something is very suspicious here.
That puts them face to face with Missy's attacker.
I said, you killed Missy Grubaugh. Let's start talking about this.
Arlington police detectives are searching for the killer of Texas college student Missy Grubaugh. They've learned that the 19-year-old co-ed filed a police report a week before her death.
Missy had reported a coworker took her tip jars, over $1,000 worth of tips.
Missy took the semester off in order to save more money, so all of her tip money was being hoarded so she could go back next semester to college.
The police report describes how Missy named a Charles Johnson as the potential thief, and that he had been staying with her before her money disappeared. Detectives speak to Missy's friends to find out more about Charles and his relationship to Missy.
Charles was a coworker and apparently was someone that she thought was a friend of hers.
She socialized with coworkers, typically after work.
Young people she worked with, that's her crowd. Charles Johnson at that time, we are told, was homeless. And so Missy, being the very generous individual that she is, allows him to come stay with her. In fact, she even gave him a key to her apartment.
Missy was very kind-hearted, and I think that it was very easy for some people to take advantage of kind-hearted people.
Talking with her friends, there was a common theme about Missy. She was not only incredibly sweet, but incredibly naive, too pure to see the bad in people. As an investigator, and that scares me because I see someone who is easily victimized.
Only days after Charles moved in, Missy discovers she has been played.
Missy finds out one day that about $1,000 is gone from her tip jar. Well, the only person that could have done that was Charles Johnson.
Enraged, Missy confronts Charles about the theft and kicks him out of her home.
Something else that was very important from everything that I learned about Missy was she will also stand up for what's right. So Missy immediately calls the police.
Missy filed a police report and a theft charge warrant was issued for Charles's arrest.
Here's some motive right here. This is retaliation for getting me in trouble. And so he's immediately on our radar. We want to see this guy. We want to talk to him. Problem is we didn't know where he was at. It's hard to find somebody who was basically homeless, and we had detectives that were assigned to find him.
While police search for Johnson, Missy's autopsy report comes in. It confirms investigators' belief that the fire is not what killed her.
The autopsy findings demonstrated she was dead before the fire started. She should have inhaled some smoke. We should have seen some soot. We should have seen some carbon monoxide in her blood. That's not the case here at all. She had a bruise of her left eye and an injury on the brow ridge that would be consistent with being struck by a fist or another object. Injuries directed that show that the assailant wanted to feel in control and dominant. A fatal stab wound to the chest was the actual cause of death. But it went completely through her heart and damaged her left lung, and there was a massive internal bleeding.
The autopsy also confirms detectives' worst suspicions. The attack was sexual in nature.
She had been forcibly penetrated. This was a rape homicide by a very aggressive perpetrator.
Though the fire destroyed physical evidence at the scene, the medical examiner immediately notifies detectives of a major discovery.
We did a search of the body for any remnant evidence that wasn't destroyed by the fire. Semen was recovered that could be analyzed for DNA.
Forensic evidence and physical evidence is great. You've got to have it. It leads you to your killer. So that semen was a forensic link to the suspect.
The semen is sent for DNA analysis, hoping it will point to the killer. But detectives make a calculated decision not to make the information public.
The fact that she was sexually assaulted was not public, it was not released. And the reason for that is because it's what we call guilt knowledge evidence. And it's knowledge that is only known by the person who did the crime. You never reveal that because that can lead you to that suspect and to identify him. That's very powerful evidence.
Other evidence is piling up too. Among the documents collected from Missy's apartment, detectives discover a treasure trove of personal letters.
These were letters from someone named Ivan Villa. The nature of the letters indicated some type of relationship between this individual and Missy Grubaugh. We don't know if it was romantic or not, but some type of close personal relationship. So that's important. We needed to find out who this individual was.
Detectives do a background check on Ivan, and they're alarmed by what they uncover.
Ivan was a registered sex offender. And that just set the hairs on the back of my neck up.
Yeah, this is the sort of individual that we're looking for. Let's go find Ivan right away.
Detectives investigating the rape and murder of Missy Grubaugh have found letters in the victim's apartment that reveal she was having a relationship with Ivan Villa, a young man with a dark past.
He was, in fact, flagged as a sex offender. And so he's immediately on our radar because we know that Missy was sexually assaulted.
Detectives examine the letters between Missy and Ivan and discover that they had a tumultuous relationship.
The context of those letters looked like a conflict of two young adults trying to make something work in a relationship that is filled with confusion.
The conflict centered around how far Missy would allow the relationship to go physically.
Missy was very moral. It was an admirable thing in our faith to remain pure until we were married. It's something that Missy took very seriously.
The letters suggest that Ivan and Missy may have come too close to crossing the line.
Apparently, there might have been times where they went a little further than Missy was comfortable with. You could tell that she was upset about that.
Missy's friends knew that she was not one to back down under pressure.
If she felt like she was being taken advantage of, then she would stand up for herself, and I admired that about her so much.
Bottom line is, we need to bring Ivan in. We need to talk to him because he was, in fact, in some level of a relationship with Missy at the time of her death.
2 days after Missy's murder, detectives bring Ivan in for an interview. He claims that he and Missy were working through their issues in a kind and loving way.
Ivan told me that he cared for Missy, and he wanted a relationship with her. He certainly did want to have that relationship go a step further, but Missy was convicted to her beliefs and to her faith. They were also battling with the fact that he had this crime over his head.
Ivan tells detectives he was home alone asleep the night Missy was murdered.
That's not an acceptable alibi for myself or Detective Stanton.
But was it really possible this young man could have committed such a horrible crime?
When you start talking about the personality of who you're looking for, you got to be careful. If you start picturing this person as this evil predator, you may miss the actual killer. That's why you have to follow the evidence. The fact that we had semen from the crime scene means we have forensic evidence that would either connect him or exclude him.
Detectives ask Ivan to provide DNA samples. But until those test results are revealed, detectives do not have grounds to hold Ivan in custody.
In 1994, those tests usually took anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks.
While waiting for results on DNA tests for Ivan and searching for Missy's former coworker, Charles Johnson, detectives continue their investigation by canvassing Missy's friends at the restaurant and learn something that adds another suspect to the list. Although this time, this suspect could be at the very top.
The name Jeffrey Smith came up. Her work associates told us that Jeffrey Smith was an employee there who Missy reported and got him in trouble at work. What we were being told is that really upset him and angered him.
Restaurant staff tell the detectives that Jeffrey had threatened to kill Missy during an outburst, and he was fired a few weeks later after getting into a fight with a manager.
What we are being told is this individual was hot-tempered and he had made threats against her. So we're putting all of this together and thinking, yeah, we really need to talk to this guy.
But who could imagine a coworker committing such a horrendous crime? Detectives speak with another employee at the restaurant who knows Jeffrey well.
His girlfriend, Kristen, agreed to come in to speak with Detective Stanton and I.
Visibly nervous, Kristen paints a troubling picture of her boyfriend.
Kristen told us that they were living together, but she also shared that she was concerned with his personality. He was very volatile. She was afraid of him, and she did not feel safe being there with him. She was going to move out and move back with her parents in Denton.
But it wasn't just fear for what Jeffrey might do that was causing Kristen to leave him. It was a fear of what he'd already done.
What Kristen wanted us to know, and she was very open about it, was she actually suspected that Jeff was involved in the murder of Missy.
Detectives investigating the murder of 19-year-old Missy Gruba are interviewing Kristen Waller, a young woman who believes her boyfriend, Jeffrey Smith, could be the killer.
She just basically said, this is what my belief is. So I asked why, how did she formulate that? Kristen told us the night of Missy's murder, Jeff did not come to the apartment, and he didn't come back all night. So she didn't know where he was at. She also knew the conflict between her and him. So she's putting all this together, and she actually believed that Jeff was with Missy on that night and that he committed this crime.
Kristen gives detectives the phone number for where Jeff is staying. A background check shows the 22-year-old has no criminal history, but detectives are still suspicious.
We know that he had made some threats against Missy, and his whereabouts are unknown on the night of her death, so we needed to talk to him. I called Jeff Smith after speaking with Kristen, and he actually was cooperative and agreed to come to the police department.
In the interview room, detectives are struck by Jeff's demeanor.
Jeff Smith was smiling and nonchalant, just really not taking the entire situation that serious. I asked him, what was your relationship like with Missy Gruba? His story was she was infatuated with him. And as a matter of fact, her infatuation is what created the problems and the conflict between him and Kristen. Kristen's telling us, no, I'm moving out because the guy scares me to death.
Jeff also has a conflicting account of his alibi.
He gave us this excuse that he was with Kristen. We already had information that he was not.
When detectives suggest Jeff is lying to them about his alibi, he laughs them off.
I've seen this type of personality before. He's narcissistic, he's cocky, he's arrogant. And I certainly wasn't going to take anything that he said at face value.
Despite their concerns about Jeff, detectives have no evidence to connect him to Missy's murder and are forced to let him go. But before he leaves, they ask him for a DNA sample. And to their surprise, he agrees.
He did give us the samples that we needed for a forensic analysis that would certainly connect or exclude him from the murder.
Then, 4 days after Missy's murder, Detective Lenore gets a frantic call from Kristen about Jeffrey Smith.
He had abducted Kristen earlier in the morning, physically abducted her and drove off with her from her parents' home in Denton.
Kristen tells Detective Lenore that Jeff was distraught and held her in an apartment for 8 hours, threatening to kill her if she tried to leave.
Kristen's telling us the motive was that Jeff just didn't want her to leave him. He released her safely a little later that day, but now she didn't know where he was at. She was definitely afraid of him. She contacted the Denton Police Department and ended up getting a warrant for his arrest for kidnapping. He became a fugitive. You've got this guy who is a loose cannon, and there was a level of urgency to find him. We put out a national broadcast along with that warrant that he is also a suspect in a murder investigation.
With Kristen safely at her parents' house and police in several states searching for Jeff, detectives in Arlington find their murder investigation in a holding pattern.
As far as Jeff Smith, we do have his hair, his blood, and his saliva for DNA that would certainly connect or exclude him from the murder.
DNA testing is still underway, but days later, investigators do get an important update from the lab.
They were able to type the blood from the semen, and they knew they were looking for someone with a certain type of blood.
Jeff did not match the blood type from the semen.
In addition to Jeffrey Smith, Ivan Villa is also ruled out because of his blood type, leaving Charles Johnson as the only active suspect for Missy's murder. And Charles is still at large.
That is incredibly frustrating because there is somebody capable of doing what they did to Missy out there, and we don't have it.
As the weeks pass with the case unsolved, Missy's family and friends grow more and more concerned.
It was very disheartening for a lot of us. We just watched the news and would hang on to anything that they would mention about it. It made all of us wonder why it happened to Missy. It was just devastating.
Then, a month into the investigation, detectives get a tip from an unexpected source.
I got a call out of the blue from Miss Grubau. She wanted to let me know that she recalled a conversation that she had with Missy. It was so incredibly bizarre. And I just thought something is very suspicious here.
Detectives hunting the killer of college student Missy Grubau have just received a lead that has turned up the heat on a case going cold. The victim's mother recalls a detail from the days just before Missy's death.
Missy's mom is providing information about how Missy had talked about this guy, Luis.
He was a 32-year-old man who had come over to the apartment, and the main thing that Mrs. Grubau remembers is that he talked to her all night long till in the early morning hours, but then they got involved in a pillow fight.
At the time, Mrs. Grubau thought little of the playful incident, but she suggests maybe Luis could help the investigation with information about Missy. Detectives have a different view.
This is bizarre. This is strange. The 32-year-old man had a pillow fight with her. It caught my attention immediately.
Investigators ask how Missy knew Luis.
Luis worked with Missy, and he lived at the Holly Park Apartments. She had done some babysitting for Louise's baby at the apartment complex.
Detectives' first stop? The restaurant where Missy and Luis both worked. Luis isn't there, but the manager tells them Luis is a model employee.
He was an Army veteran, I learned that about him. No criminal history. Matter of fact, management gave him an award for a heroic act. He actually stopped a robbery.
The detectives ask workers what they knew about Luis's relationship with Missy.
Co-workers described Lewis as a friend. Sometimes after work, they might enjoy a beer together.
Detectives also hear something that catches them off guard.
A work associate relayed to us that Lewis made the comment, and these were his words, is, "I hope they catch that son of a bitch that killed and raped Missy." The fact that she was sexually assaulted, no one should have known that. That was never released. He might have just been speculating, but the fact that it was said really, really alarmed me.
Investigators have uncovered yet another suspicious coworker in Missy's life, one that she saw every day. Detectives asked the manager for Luis's phone number.
Told him I was investigating the death of Missy Grubal and that his name had surfaced from her babysitting his son, and Luis agreed to come see me. He was relaxed, he was polite, pleasant, regular, clean-cut guy. He told us that Missy used to babysit his son and that they worked together. So I told Luis what I want to do is exclude all of the known males to Missy so that I could find the guilty party. And the process in which I do that is I take samples, blood, hair, and saliva, compare it to the DNA, and exclude them.
The request instantly changes Luis's mood.
His response immediately was, what are you talking about? Wasn't the evidence all burnt up? And I said, no, it wasn't. I've got significant incriminating evidence that was specifically left there by the suspect. Now his demeanor is changing, and you can see the concern in his face. I kind of even broke my own rule a little bit here, because a lot of times I don't like to give guilt knowledge information, but the fact that I knew that he had already said something about Missy being sexually assaulted, I went ahead and revealed to him whoever killed Missy sexually assaulted her, and I've got their semen. And Luis immediately says, I've got to go. I have to leave. And I have no legal right to keep him, regardless of what I believe. I just simply asked, Luis, are you going to give me your sample? He says, I got to get out of here. I got to leave. We'll do it Monday.
Monday comes and goes with no sign of Luis, but detectives don't let up.
I call him. He calls me back Tuesday. We make arrangements for Wednesday. Come Wednesday, he doesn't show up again.
Detective Lenore calls Luis at work, but gets some alarming news.
Management had informed us that the woman that he was living with at the time, his common-law wife, had called and said that he had to leave town. I called her. I said, I hear Luis is gone. You and I need to talk.
Jeanette has been living with Luis for 2 years. The couple moved into the Holly Park apartments 6 months earlier.
They had been together long enough for them to have a child together. She was also pregnant with another child. But what was interesting is on the Monday that Luis was going to meet with me, which was about 3 days earlier, they got married. They got legally married. Well, in Texas, a wife cannot testify against her husband. I mean, those are my thoughts that are going on. I kind of kept that to myself and said, okay, that's interesting.
Jeanette knew Missy as a sweet girl who used to babysit her son and had been shocked to hear about her murder.
And so I asked if she recalls what occurred on the night of Missy's murder. She said Luis had gotten off work about 10:30 or 11 and informed her that he was going to have some drinks with some friends. Then he came in close to midnight, and then she heard him leave.
2 hours later, Jeanette hears Luis return.
She hears him come into the apartment and takes a shower and then leaves again. And then she hears him come back again. She notices that he's coughing and he smells of smoke His story to her is that he was out jogging and he noticed that there was an apartment on fire. And so he went in there and that he saw this individual on a bed, and he said it was Missy. And he tried to do mouth to mouth, he said, but he couldn't do it. And he was overcome by smoke and that he had to leave, and he came back. That's it, end of story. They just go to bed. Nobody calls 911. Nobody does anything. They go to sleep. I mean, the story is so bizarre, but she didn't question him. And I don't think she ever really saw it for what it was until she actually sits down and starts telling me. And as she's telling me, reality is setting in as far as what Luis might have done. She's pretty much stunned. I said, I need to go into your apartment. I need to get a search warrant.
Investigators descend on Luis and Jeanette's apartment, just a few buildings over from where Missy was killed.
One of the things that I wanted was his dog tags. Because he was in the Army, I wanted to know what his blood type was. And I wanted to know if the blood type from his dog tags matched the blood type from the semen.
The blood type matches that of Missy's attacker. It's the link detectives have been looking for, and enough to bring Luis in. But first, they'll need to find him.
So I got an arrest warrant for Luis. The next day, I get a teletype that the vehicle that Luis was in was found abandoned and burned in San Antonio.
Detectives believe they have finally uncovered the man who murdered Missy Grubaugh and set fire to her apartment. But Luis Arroyo has fled Arlington. His car found abandoned and set ablaze in San Antonio.
We don't know, but suspected there was evidence there, but the car was pretty much gone. I mean, it was burned up.
There's an urgency. We need to find this person as soon as possible.
Detective Lenore suspects Luis's wife Jeanette knows where he's hiding.
I told her that we realize you had nothing to do with this crime, but you can be a party by covering and by lying. So I said, you realize that when she was murdered, she was sexually assaulted. And when she heard that, you could see it upset her. It angered her.
Confronted with the full horror of what was done to Missy, Jeanette gives up Luis.
Jeanette gave me the address where he was staying in San Antonio. San Antonio Police Department went into the home and arrested Luis without incident.
Detectives Lenore and Stanton traveled to San Antonio to confront Luis Arroyo in person.
It is the most unique interrogation I've ever seen. I mean, Luis really had like a mental regression, and he actually wound up in a ball on the floor, weeping and kind of in a fetal position.
I don't know what he was doing. I just thought he wanted us to have some type of empathy for him.
When Luis finally tells his side of the story, it doesn't add up for detectives.
He did not admit to sexually assaulting Missy Grubaugh. He did admit, yes, I did have sexual intercourse with her. He said, we had consensual sex. I knew it was her first time, and I wanted it to be a very gentle and pleasant experience for her. That just sickened me. What happened to that young lady was anything but gentle and loving. It was brutal.
Faced with Luis's denial, Detective Lenore changes tactics.
I said, you killed Missy Grubaugh. All right, let's start talking about this. And he said, you know, I don't remember. I remember getting a knife. I think I did stab her.
Detectives are stunned. Is this the confession they've been waiting for?
I'm not going to call it a confession because my definition of a confession is someone who says, this is what I did and I did everything that you have evidence that they committed. Luis gave a statement with several admissions that included guilt knowledge information. Luis did not admit to setting the fire, but he recalls that there was a fire set. He gave us all of this incriminating information that clearly said it was him.
They have enough to charge Luis. But detectives want to make the case against him airtight.
Detective Stanton and I got an evidentiary search warrant and collected his blood and his hair and saliva sample. He was, in fact, matched to the DNA from the sexual assault kit.
With Luis's statements, detectives can put together exactly what happened on the night Missy was murdered.
I believe he went there thinking he could convince her to have intercourse with him. His primary focus was to have sex with that young lady. Maybe initially he thought would be consensual, which it would never happen. So now he's mad at her, and then he took it to another level, physically abused her, sexually assaulted her, and then he killed her. After he killed Missy, he needed to destroy evidence, and that's when he made his decision to set fire to the apartment.
Lewis was charged with capital murder. Once we had the written statement, we had the statements from the wife. Pretty straightforward case.
As Luis awaits trial, detectives zero in on two former suspects in the case.
Charles Johnson was finally tracked down, and he was not even in the area at the time of the murder.
Jeffrey Smith was arrested and convicted of kidnapping his girlfriend, Kristen. He received a 4-year sentence. Luis Arroyo's trial lasts only 5 days.
We got a conviction rather quickly. And in Texas, once a person is convicted of capital murder with the death penalty waived, it's an automatic life sentence.
Although detectives have found their killer, the win is bittersweet.
He being in prison will never take away the pain, the horrific torture that child was put through. And him being in prison will never heal the wounds that the family has. They never recover. You can't bring Missy back. You just do what you got to do and make sure people pay for the crimes they commit.
Missy's mother is in a state of permanent grief. Missy's death